Hello, and welcome to Eco Show, a show about things happening in ecology, the environment, and things sort of related to that. So I'll be talking about research and general happenings, stuff in the news that's come up, and all that sort of stuff. So I generally talk about any ecology things that have been popping up in the news, and then I'll go into recent research that's been coming out, and then I leave. So the structure you can expect for today is I've actually added something new. Maybe I'll do this. Well, I don't have any popular news for today, but what I've added, I'm pretty excited about this, is an animal of the week. I was feeling a little bit down today, just generally, and that popped to mind. It's like, I need, regardless of what the news is going to be, there's going to be an animal of the week. So the animal of the week for this week is the llama. Something about the llama just popped to mind. I just needed something cuddly. I don't know if llamas are actually cuddly, but they look cuddly. And so that needed to be in my mind for this week. So, animal of the week, the llama. So let's learn a little bit about llamas. Llamas, the scientific name, I'm not sure if this is how it's pronounced, but I'm going to pronounce it this way for at least a short period of time because their species name looks like llama glama, which is amazing. It's probably the coolest species name I've ever heard of for an animal. But the way that llama is spelled in Spanish, that would be pronounced llama. So I don't know if I should look into that as well, if that's how it's pronounced. But anyways, llama glama is what we're working with at the moment. And they are part of the Camelidae family. So you can find the camel bit in that name to guess that they are part of the camel crew, which include camels, and there's also alpaca in there and a few other guys, but they're in that squad. And they are thought to have come from the Great Plains of North America and make their way about 3 to 2.7 million years ago to South America when the sort of Panama Canal region rose up. And now there's no camel sort of species in North America. So they're holding down the fort, but they made it down there and they're having a great time, I hope. They were used initially mostly as meat and pack animals, and also for their wool. And they're social animals, and they live as a herd, which is great. Great to know that they hang out and have company with one another. And they can carry 25 to 30% of their body weight, which makes them a good pack animal. Let's see what else. And sometimes they can also be trained apparently to be used as guard animals, so they can guard your flock of sheep or other things. But what you're not supposed to do is have multiple guard males, because apparently they then just are hanging out with each other and then become good friends, and then they don't really care about the herd as much. So if you're gonna, which is kind of sad, it's like you want to, so they will protect your herd of something from predators because they're wanting to protect it, but then they don't have the little homies. So that's up to you. If you want to have your it's good to know you can if you're in that situation where you need a guard llama. They're capable of doing that. Okay. Now we're moving to our research section for the rest of this episode. We are looking at the journal called Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment. This is their December edition. Some of these articles were published early in the year, but this is the December publication of Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment. So, our first article, Climate Change, is called Climate Change Paves the Way for a New Interocean Fish Interchange. And that's by Ernesto Azurro and Manuela de Amen. And that was originally published in September of 2022. And what they're looking at is the movement of invasive ocean species moving around the oceans. So about 150 years ago, they said, I didn't look at the exact date, but in the 1800s, the Suez Canal was built, which connected the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. I don't know if they gave Mediterranean Ocean, but it connected the two. And after that connection happened, you had a lot of invasive species move into the Mediterranean by removing that physical barrier. And there are big impacts economically and biodiversity wise because of this. So it was a big deal when that happened. It wasn't necessarily something that people were planning for. And climate change is changing borders in the ocean in a similar way. So different areas of the ocean will have different temperature areas, which act as physical barriers because certain species have a range of ocean temperatures they're in, and they're not going to go from one place to another. But climate change, as ocean temperatures are changing, things can move around. So they modeled distribution of species, and you can see here, this is a illustration of different amounts of invasion of a species, which I should have put under there, under different RCPs, which stands for Representative Carbon Pathways, I believe. And these are different scenarios, emission scenarios. So for basically how bad climate change is going to get. And in all of these, it looks pretty red everywhere. So it looks like this species that we are seeing being modeled in this image is going to be moving and grooving. But one of the interesting things that they noted is that climate change, along with the Suez Canal there, is essentially interconnecting now the Caribbean in some ways to the Indian Ocean. So there's this whole new connection that's going to be there, because you can see, well, you actually can't see very well from here, but through the Suez Canal that goes through the Mediterranean, that all stays at a fairly consistent latitude. And so they're talking about the Mediterranean is going to be under climate change, possibly a highway for invasive species to move across. So something to be aware of if you're an invasive species and you're looking to move to the Caribbean. If you've been in the Indian Ocean and you're looking for kind of more of a Caribbean lifestyle, you may have some good opportunities in the coming centuries. And if you're not, then this is something to be aware of and will likely impact allocation of resources for species control. Okay, continuing on the topic of water and movement of species, our next article is Global Swimways for the Conservation of Migratory Freshwater Fishes. This is by Thomas Worthington et al. And was published in August 2022. So freshwater rivers are fragmented and increasingly stressed by pollution and things like that, and they're fragmented by things like dams and human incursions. And what they were aiming to do is identify global rivers that support migration routes of biologically and socioeconomically important fishes. So we have an image here which is showing part of how they identified important rivers, and so you can see they have a variety of species richness colors here. Hopefully that's big enough for you to see, but the different colors indicate species richness of a given river, and so that can be used to help identify which rivers to conserve. You would take into account a lot more complex things, but the big thing that they're trying to get going is more of a global awareness and understanding of the need for swimways. So for species that need a river in order to migrate and reproduce, it's important to identify those, and a lot of these species are important for people who live upstream to eat. So having a global understanding of what are rivers that need to be prioritized for keeping swimmable for species is really important. You're seeing in some places in the US, they are doing, in order to get through dams and things like that, they had sort of a rocket launcher thing that would shoot salmon up over dams and things like that. So, but a lot of countries probably don't have the resources to be able to make that happen. So that's what they're talking about. Global swimways for the conservation of migratory freshwater fishes. Okay. Hopping on out of the water and into the air. This article is called Shifting Along the Urbanization Gradient. A countryside hawk now thrives in the city. And this is by Josh Beninde and Daniel S. Cooper, and published in December of 2022. So they're talking about the countryside hawk, from the title, is Cooper's hawk, which lost a lot of its range in Southern California due to urbanization and persecution. And it was persecuted because people thought it was eating their chickens. So it was called a chicken hawk, and people were killing it because they thought it was eating their chicken, but it has been shown to not have a huge detrimental impact on chickens, supposedly. But it has adapted to live in urban areas and made a comeback. And in particular, it's widely present across Los Angeles, and it eats on squirrels and rats. And what they're pointing out in this article is that it has moved into these urban areas and sort of treats them in similar ways to how it would operate in its original habitat, which was oak and riparian, which just means riparian means river, by the river. So woodlands in these areas. So it's nesting in trees in the city. And in particular, it's nesting in non-native trees like pines, eucalyptus, and ash trees. So it's really found a way to continue to thrive and do its thing. And it brings up an important issue of species and invasive species and things like that, particularly in talking about plants, because like they were pointing out, these non-native trees are preferable for them to put their nests in. So you have got that going on, but then the idea around some of these trees might be to get rid of them, but it's important to be aware of the ecological impact on species that you do want to be there, like this hawk. So here's a nice image of the hawk, which I think I'll put up a little bit earlier. And let's see if there's any other interesting information on that. That's sort of the main points of that article. Okay, we're on to our last article, still from Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment, December edition. And I'm going to read the start of this because it was really well written. And the name of this article is Mermaids by Another Name. And this was by Adrian Burton. And this was published in December of 2022. Africa's great Niger River rises in the mountains of Guinea to cut a huge 2,600-mile arc before flowing into the Atlantic Ocean on Nigeria's tropical coast. During its course, it passes through the beautiful but brutal Sahel in Mali, bringing life to Timbuktu, still some 1,300 miles from the river's mouth. Go another 150 miles or so further upstream, however, and the river unexpectedly spawns a rich, green wetland covering nearly 16,000 square miles, the inner Niger Delta, also known as the Masina. Who would believe that here, over 1,500 canoe miles from the sea, and even way beyond into Guinea itself, there are mermaids, if that's the right term. Well, there are Cervinians, animals often proposed to be fish-tailed maidens of sailors' legends, African manatees. Trichicus senegalensis, to be precise. Very little is known about these creatures' lives, although we do know that, while a little smaller, they look very similar to their better-known West Indian manatee cousins, Trichicus manatus, who hail from Florida and the Caribbean. And like them, they also inhabit warm coastal waters and estuaries. You might see one, if you're lucky, feeding on seagrass anywhere from southern Mauritania to central Angola. But their existence well inland, no matter how unexpected, is no new discovery. Even those of us living far from the banks of the Niger have had ample time to take note. So that was a well-written little article that continues on and appears to be freely available, titled Mermaids by Another Name by Adrian Burton. And it goes on to talk about these African manatees and where they're living. And in particular, an interesting thing that was noted was this idea that, and why the title of the article was Mermaids by Another Name, is that this idea of manatees being like mermaids ought maybe to be changed because they inhabit so many river ecosystems. that there's actually the idea that that was where they first started living, and they were eating and living in rivers and then adapted to live out in the ocean. So, little bonus animal, the African manatee. There should be a little image here. And he says instead of mermaids, if there should be a name for them, it should be river girls. And they look pretty adorable. So there we have it. It's a little short episode for this week, but I hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time. See ya.